My name is Sophie. I am 28 years old, and I work as a preschool aide in a small town outside of Denver. My grandmother just turned 80. She insisted on a big party at the Italian restaurant downtown. She invited everyone: aunts, uncles, cousins, neighbors. There were about 35 people packed into the private dining room. White tablecloths, candles, a three-tier cake with pink roses on it. My grandmother stood up to give a toast. She was small but fierce. She had white hair pinned up neatly and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She tapped her glass with a fork. Everyone went quiet. She smiled at me across the room. "I want to say something about my Sophie," she said. 8 years ago, when her father passed, I made a promise. I told myself I would never let that girl struggle. So every month, I have been sending her mother $2,500 for Sophie's college, for her health insurance, for her future. She raised her glass. And look at her now. My beautiful, educated granddaughter. I am so proud of the woman you've become. The room clapped. People smiled at me. But I wasn't smiling. I was frozen. My fork was halfway to my mouth. My hand started to tremble. I set the fork down slowly. $2,500 a month. For 8 years. I looked at my mother. She was sitting 3 seats away from me. She was staring at the bread basket. Her face had gone completely white. My stepfather was next to her. He was gripping his water glass so tight I thought it might crack. He wouldn't look up. I did the math in my head. $2,500 times 12, months times 8 years. That was $240,000. I never saw a single dollar, not one. I dropped out of community college after 1 semester because I couldn't afford the books. I didn't have health insurance until I turned 26 and got it through my job. I ate ramen and peanut butter sandwiches for years. I took the bus in snowstorms because I couldn't afford a car. I thought my grandmother had forgotten about me after my dad died. I thought she was too old and too far away to help. My mother told me that. She said, "Grandma is on a fixed income, Sophie. She barely makes ends meet. Don't bother her." I believed it. I believed every word. And now my grandmother was standing in front of 35 people, telling me she had sent $250,000 for my future. And I had none of it. But before I tell you how everything unraveled, go ahead and like and subscribe. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? My name is Sophie. I am 28 years old. I sat there staring at my mother. I waited for her to look at me. She wouldn't. She was tearing a piece of bread into tiny pieces, dropping crumbs on the white tablecloth. My stepfather, Dan, cleared his throat. He leaned over to my grandmother and put on his big friendly smile, the one he used when he wanted something. "Mom, you are too generous," he said. He always called her mom even though she wasn't his mother. "Sophie is doing great because of your support. We made sure every penny went to good use. Right, Lisa?" He nudged my mother. My mother looked up. She forced a smile. "Of course," she said. Her voice was too bright, too quick. "Sophie knows how much we've helped her. We managed everything carefully." Managed. That word hit me like a slap. I thought about my bank account. I had $87 in it. I thought about my apartment. It was a studio above a laundromat. The pipes rattled all night. There was a crack in the ceiling that leaked when it rained. I put a bucket under it. I had been putting a bucket under it for 3 years. I thought about my shoes. I was wearing flats I bought at a thrift store for $4. The sole on the right one was peeling away from the toe. I had taped it with electrical tape that morning because I didn't want it flapping at my grandmother's party. Managed. They managed $240,000. And I was taping my shoes together. My grandmother looked at me. She had that look in her eyes. The one that said she was reading the room. "Sophie, darling," she said, "tell me about school. Did you finish your degree?" The table went quiet again. Not the happy quiet from before. A different kind. A nervous kind. I opened my mouth. My throat was dry. I took a sip of water. "I didn't finish, Grandma," I said. My mother cut in immediately. "She decided college wasn't for her," my mother said. She waved her hand like it was nothing. "She wanted to work with kids. She's very happy at the daycare." "Aren't you, Sophie?" My grandmother frowned. "But the money was for tuition." "Lisa, you told me she was enrolled at the state university. You sent me her schedule." I blinked. "What schedule?" My mother had sent my grandmother a fake class schedule. She transferred, my mother said quickly. And then she changed her mind. You know how young people are. My grandmother didn't smile. She turned back to me. Sophie, do you have health insurance? I do now, I said. Through my job. Now, my grandmother repeated. When did you get it? When I turned 26. My job offers it. My grandmother's face changed. The warmth drained out of it. She looked at my mother. Lisa, I sent money every month specifically for health insurance. Sophie should have been covered since she was 20. She was on her father's plan before that. When he died, I told you to get her private coverage immediately. My mother shifted in her seat. We looked into it, she said. It was complicated. The marketplace plans were confusing, and Sophie didn't really need it. She was healthy. I wasn't healthy. When I was 22, I had a kidney infection that got so bad I ended up in the emergency room. I didn't go for 3 days because I didn't have insurance and I was terrified of the bill. By the time I went, I was burning with fever. They told me another day and it could have spread to my blood. That ER visit cost me $6,800. I'm still paying it off. I make $40 a month payments. I'll be paying it until I'm 35. My grandmother put down her glass. She looked around the table. She looked at the people eating and chatting. Then she looked back at my mother with an expression I had never seen before. It was cold. Lisa, she said quietly but firmly, we will discuss this after the party. At my house. Tonight. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but my grandmother held up one hand. Tonight, she repeated. And that was that. The rest of the party was torture. People laughed and ate cake, but I couldn't taste anything. I kept looking at my mother. She was whispering to Dan. He was shaking his head, his jaw tight. They were planning something. They were getting their story straight. After the party, my grandmother drove me to her house. It was a small craftsman bungalow she had lived in for 50 years. She told me to sit at the kitchen table. She made me tea. Then she called my mother and told her to come over. Bring Dan, she said, and bring the financial records. My mother and Dan arrived 20 minutes later. Dan was carrying a folder. It was thin. My mother's eyes were red like she had been crying in the car. My grandmother sat at the head of the table. She looked like a judge. She was 80 years old and barely 5 feet tall, but in that moment she was the most powerful person I had ever seen. Show me, my grandmother said. Dan opened the folder. He pulled out a few printed pages. Here, he said. We kept a spreadsheet. Every dollar accounted for. My grandmother put on her reading glasses. She looked at the papers for a long time. Then she set them down. This is not a bank statement, she said. This is something you typed up on a computer. I want real bank records. From the bank, not from your printer. Dan's face tightened. Mom, I don't have those handy. I'd have to request them. Then request them, my grandmother said. Tomorrow morning. First thing. Dan looked at my mother. My mother looked at the floor. In the meantime, my grandmother said, let me ask Sophie some questions. She turned to me. Sophie, where do you live? A studio apartment on Cedar Street, I said, above the laundromat. How much is your rent? $750 a month. Do you have a car? No. I take the bus. What do you eat? I paused. I cook at home mostly. Rice, beans, eggs, whatever is on sale. My grandmother closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were glistening. She looked at my mother. I sent $2,500 every month, she said slowly. That is $30,000 a year. Where is it, Lisa? My mother started crying. Mom, you don't understand. Things are expensive. Dan's business had some rough years. The kids needed things. The kids. She meant my stepsisters, Megan and Haley, Dan's daughters from his first marriage. They had lived with us since my mother married Dan when I was 17. I was the oldest by 3 years. What did the kids need? My grandmother asked. My mother didn't answer, so I did. Megan went to a private university, I said quietly. Full tuition, no loans. Haley went to cosmetology school in Scottsdale. She lived in an apartment my mother and Dan paid for. My grandmother turned to me. And you? I went to community college for 1 semester. I dropped out because I couldn't afford textbooks and transportation at the same time. I chose transportation because I needed to get to my job. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall. My grandmother stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to us. I could see her shoulders shaking. When she turned around, her face was set like concrete. "I want to see your house," she said to my mother. "Right now?" my mother asked. "Now." We drove to my mother's house, all four of us in Dan's truck. It was a brand new pickup, leather seats, heated mirrors. It still smelled like the dealership. It had a sticker price of around $65,000. I knew because Megan had posted a photo of it on Instagram 3 months ago, with the caption, "Dad's new baby." My grandmother rode in silence. She didn't say a word the entire drive. We pulled into the driveway. The house was a 4-bedroom colonial in a nice subdivision. It had new siding, new windows, a landscaped front yard with one of those professional irrigation systems. The driveway was freshly paved. There were 2 other cars parked there, a white SUV that my mother drove and a red sedan that belonged to Haley. 3 cars for 2 people. My mother and Dan lived alone now. Megan was in Austin. Haley had her own place across town. My grandmother walked through the front door. She stood in the entryway and looked around. She didn't say anything. She just looked. She walked into the kitchen. It had been remodeled. Quartz countertops, a farmhouse sink, a 6-burner stove, a double oven. She opened the refrigerator. It was packed. Steaks, salmon, imported cheese, bottles of wine, organic vegetables, 3 different kinds of juice. She closed it. She walked into the living room. New furniture, a massive TV mounted on the wall, a sound bar, a leather sectional that probably seated 8 people. She went upstairs. She looked at the master bedroom, a king bed with a tufted headboard, an ensuite bathroom with a walk-in shower that had rain heads and body jets. She went to what used to be my bedroom. It was an office now. A standing desk with 2 monitors, a treadmill in the corner. My room was gone. There was no trace of me in this house. She went back downstairs. She stood in the living room. Dan was hovering near the kitchen, arms crossed. My mother was wringing her hands by the staircase. "This remodel," my grandmother said. "When did you do it?" 2 years ago, Dan mumbled. "How much?" "I don't remember exactly." "Guess," my grandmother said. "Maybe 45,000, my grandmother clarified. "Yes." She pointed at the TV. "That? It was on sale. The truck outside? That's a business expense. I need it for work." My grandmother turned to me. "Sophie, when was the last time you went to a doctor for a checkup?" "Not an emergency. A regular checkup." I thought about it. I haven't had a regular checkup since I was on my dad's insurance. I was 20. 8 years, my grandmother said. She looked at my mother. 8 years without a doctor. While you installed rain showers and bought trucks. My mother broke. "Mom, we didn't plan it this way. It just happened. The money came in and we had bills. The mortgage, the cars. Dan's business had a bad stretch, and the girls needed tuition and we used it. We always meant to set some aside for Sophie, but there was never enough left over. There was never enough left over," my grandmother repeated. "From $2,500 a month. There was never enough left over for the person it was meant for." She sat down on the leather sectional. She looked tired. She looked like every one of her 80 years. "I used to feel guilty," I said. Everyone looked at me. When I couldn't make rent, I felt ashamed. When I ate cereal for dinner 3 nights in a row, I told myself I needed to try harder. When I couldn't afford the medicine for my kidney infection and it got worse, I blamed myself. I thought I was failing at being an adult. I looked at my mother. "You told me that. You said, 'Sophie, you need to learn to budget. You can't keep running to us for help.' You said that to me while you were spending $2,500 a month of my money." My mother was sobbing now. "It wasn't like that." "What was it like then?" I asked. "Tell me." Because here is what it was like for me. I held up my hand and started counting. Megan's tuition at her private university. 4 years. That's about $50,000 a year. Was that my money? Silence. Haley's apartment in Scottsdale. 18 months at probably $1,500 a month. Was that my money? Silence. The trip to Cancun 2 years ago. The one you told me was a work conference for Dan. I saw the photos. Was that my money? Silence. The kitchen remodel. $45,000. Was that my money? My mother put her face in her hands. Dan stepped forward. "Now hold on," he said. His voice had an edge to it. "This is getting out of hand. We took care of Sophie. We fed her. We housed her until she was 18. Until I was 18, I repeated. And then you pushed me out the door 2 weeks after my father's funeral. You told me it was time to be independent. I was grieving. I had just buried my dad. And you told me the room was needed for Haley. Dan's face went red. Haley needed her own space. She was struggling. She was 15 and she wanted a bigger room, I said. And you chose her over your stepdaughter whose father had just died. My grandmother stood up from the couch. Enough, she said. I have seen enough. I have heard enough. She turned to Dan. You are not family to me. You married my daughter-in-law. That does not make you my son. And you have stolen from my granddaughter. Dan started to protest, but my grandmother cut him off. Do not speak, she said. Her voice was quiet, but it could have cut steel. She turned to my mother. Lisa, my son loved you. He trusted you with the most important thing in his life. His daughter. He would be destroyed if he saw this. My mother let out a wail. You will hear from my attorney, my grandmother said. Every dollar will be accounted for. Every receipt. Every bank statement. If you cooperate, this stays civil. If you lie, if you hide anything, I will go to the police. She looked at me. Put your coat on, Sophie. We are leaving. I grabbed my thin jacket off the hook by the door. It was the same one I'd had for 4 years. The zipper was broken, and I used a safety pin to close it. My grandmother noticed. She didn't say anything. She just took my hand. We walked out of that house, past the new truck, past the SUV, past the landscaped yard that my money had paid for. My grandmother drove me back to her bungalow. She made me another cup of tea. Then she sat across from me and held both of my hands. I am going to fix this, she said. I should have checked on you myself. I should never have trusted your mother to do the right thing. That is my failure, and I am sorry. I started to cry. Not from sadness, from relief. For 8 years I had felt invisible. I had felt like a ghost in my own family. And now someone saw me. The next 2 months were chaos. My grandmother didn't play around. She hired an estate attorney named Patricia Huang, who specialized in financial fraud within families. Patricia was calm, precise, and terrifying. She subpoenaed the bank records, all of them. 8 years of transactions. The records told the story better than any confession could. Every month, my grandmother's $2,500 arrived in my mother's joint account with Dan. Within days, it was gone. Payments to the mortgage company. Payments to Megan's university bursar. A monthly transfer to Haley's checking account. Department stores, restaurants, an $8,000 charge to a travel agency in November 2 years ago. The Cancun trip. Auto loans. Home improvement contractors. A $3,200 charge to a jewelry store on my mother's birthday. Not a single transfer to me. Not a single payment for tuition, rent, insurance, or medical bills with my name on it. Zero. In 8 years, the only money I ever received from my mother was a $50 gift card to Target on my 25th birthday. And she made a big deal about it. She texted me, "Happy birthday, baby. I know it's not much, but times are hard." Times were hard. With $2,500 a month in free money sitting in her account, Patricia laid it all out on the conference table. She had organized it into a spreadsheet with categories. My grandmother sat next to me. She looked at the numbers with the focus of a woman who had run her own bookkeeping business for 30 years. The total disbursed, Patricia said, is $240,000 over 8 years. The total that reached Sophie is zero. The total spent on the 2 stepdaughters and household upgrades is approximately $185,000. The remaining $55,000 was absorbed into general living expenses. My grandmother nodded slowly. What are our options? We can pursue civil action for the full amount, plus interest, Patricia said. Given the clear paper trail, this is very strong. We can also file a report with the district attorney's office. Depending on Colorado statutes, this could qualify as theft by deception or even elder financial abuse, since they deceived you to obtain the funds. File both, my grandmother said without hesitation. My mother and Dan tried to negotiate. They offered to pay back $80,000 over 15 years. My grandmother said no. They offered $120,000 over 10 years. My grandmother said no. They offered to give me the white SUV. My grandmother said that's my granddaughter's money being offered back to her in the form of a depreciating asset. No. It went to court. The judge reviewed everything. The bank records. The fake schedules my mother had emailed to my grandmother. Text messages where my mother told me she couldn't help me with rent while simultaneously spending my money on a kitchen remodel. The judge also saw my medical records. The kidney infection that nearly killed me because I delayed treatment. The dental work I couldn't afford. A documented vitamin deficiency from years of poor nutrition. He compared those records to my mother's credit card statements from the same period. Spa visits, restaurant meals, online shopping. The judgment was $240,000 plus $38,000 in interest and legal fees. My mother and Dan didn't have it. They had spent it all. So the enforcement began. The house was sold. It took 3 months. My mother cried the day the for sale sign went up. She called me and begged me to stop it. "Sophie, this is your childhood home." "No, it isn't," I said. "My childhood home was the house where Dad and I lived. You sold that when you married Dan." She hung up on me. The house sold for $410,000. After the remaining mortgage was paid, there was enough to cover most of the judgment. The truck was sold. The SUV was sold. Dan's boat, the one he kept at the reservoir that I didn't even know about, was sold. Megan called me from Austin. She was furious. "You're ruining our family," she said. "Your family used my money to pay for your degree," I said. "So your degree is partly mine. You're welcome." She called me a word I won't repeat and hung up. Haley didn't call at all. She just blocked me on everything. That was fine. I didn't need her in my life. She had lived in a paid apartment in Scottsdale while I was eating canned soup in a studio with a leaking ceiling. She could stay blocked. My mother and Dan moved into a rental. A small 2-bedroom in a part of town they used to drive through with the windows up. Dan had to get a second job delivering packages in the evenings. My mother went back to work as a receptionist after years of not working. She told people at her new job that they had downsized by choice. She was embarrassed. She was ashamed. But she wasn't sorry. I know she wasn't sorry because of what she said at the final hearing. The judge asked her if she had anything to say. She stood up and said, "I was trying to hold my family together. Everything I did was for my family." She didn't mean me. She never meant me. My grandmother sat with me that night after the judgment. We were at her kitchen table again. The same table where this whole thing started. She pushed an envelope across to me. "What is this?" I asked. "It's the first check from the settlement," she said. "And there is something else." She pulled out a folder. Inside was an acceptance letter from the state university. She had called the admissions office herself. She had explained my situation. They had offered me a spot for the fall semester with a partial scholarship based on financial hardship. "You are going back to school," she said. "And this time, the money goes straight into your account. Nobody in between. Nobody managing anything." I looked at the letter. I looked at the check. I looked at my grandmother. I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. She held me. She smelled like lavender and peppermint, just like she always did when I was little and my dad would bring me to visit her. She felt safe. She felt like home. That was 14 months ago. I am sitting in my apartment now. It's not the studio above the laundromat anymore. It's a 1-bedroom in a clean building near the university campus. It has big windows. The ceiling doesn't leak. The pipes don't rattle. I have a real bed with a good mattress. I sleep through the night. My refrigerator is full. I have eggs and milk and fresh vegetables and chicken. I eat 3 meals a day. I never skip meals anymore. I never stand in the grocery store doing math in my head trying to figure out if I can afford both bread and cheese in the same week. I am enrolled in the university. I am studying early childhood education. I want to run my own preschool someday. I am pulling a 3.8 gigapascals. My professors say I have a gift for working with kids. I know I do. Those years at the daycare weren't wasted. They taught me patience and love and how to see the world through small eyes. I have health insurance, real insurance. I went to a doctor for a full checkup for the first time in 8 years. She said I was generally healthy, but I had been living with an iron deficiency that explained why I was tired all the time. She put me on supplements. Within a month, I felt like a different person. I had energy. I could think clearly. I could stay up studying without falling asleep at my desk. My grandmother comes over every Wednesday. I cook dinner for her. She sits at my little table and tells me stories about my dad when he was young. She tells me he was stubborn and kind and funny. She says I have his eyes. We never talk about my mother. We don't need to. She is out there somewhere, living in her rental, working her receptionist job. making monthly payments on the judgment. She is paying back what she stole. It will take years. That's not my problem. Sometimes late at night I think about the 8 years I lost. The hunger, the cold, the shame, the feeling that I was not good enough, that I was failing, that I deserved to struggle. I remember the nights I lay on my mattress on the floor listening to the laundromat machines rumbling beneath me, wondering what I did wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I was being robbed by the people who were supposed to protect me, and now I know the truth. And the truth set me free. I pour myself a cup of coffee. I sit by the window. The morning light comes in warm and golden. I have a class at 10. I have a study group at 2. I have dinner with my grandmother at 6. I have a full life. A real life. Not a life built on someone else's scraps. A life that is mine. I take a sip and I look at the sky. It's blue and wide and open. For the first time in as long as I can remember, I am not afraid of tomorrow. The nightmare is over, and I am just getting started.